Hi everyone. The purpose of this video is to provide an overview of CIS 351 and how I approach teaching it. The first thing you should know is that I make very little use of Blackboard. It simply doesn't provide the tools I need to efficiently manage the class. I do plan to use Respondus for quizzes, but other than that, your primary resource for this course is going to be my GVSU webpage, kermisgvsu.github.io. I'll be sure to include that URL below in the comments. If you look at the upper left in the navigation bar, you'll see a link for CIS 351. I encourage you to bookmark this page because you'll visit it a lot during the semester. On this page, you'll find all the information you expect. My contact information, office hours, a link to the syllabus, a list of assignments and labs, information about the textbook, and here at the bottom, you'll see a list of references that you might find helpful at different points throughout the semester. Perhaps the most important link on this page is the timeline. Again, the link is here in the navigation bar. The timeline will show you what videos you should be watching, what assignments you should be working on, and what I plan to discuss during the upcoming Zoom session. The next thing you should know is that this course will be a combination of mastery grading and the old-fashioned pile of points. This section of the syllabus shows how your final grade is determined. Notice that there are 4 categories: quizzes, exams, projects, and homework. Homework uses a mastery scale, where homework must be complete and thoughtful to meet expectations. I don't necessarily expect every problem to be perfect. However, it should be clear that you've put in an honest effort. That means you can't just rush through writing garbage down and have it meet expectations. Also, about half the homework problems are auto-graded on PrairieLearn. These problems should be correct by the due date. Or, if you're having trouble getting the correct answer, we should have had a conversation or two well before the deadline. In other words, don't do the homework at the last minute. I'm going to use a model where we have many small homework assignments, like 1 or 2 problems most class periods. The benefit of this model is that we can work through these problems in class soon after you've worked on them, rather than waiting several days for the assignment to be due and for me to have graded them. The cost of this model is that it's hard to give much credit for late work because there's not that much value in simply copying down the answer we've worked through in class and turning it in. Projects will also use the mastery scale. You're expected to continue working on projects until they meet expectations. If you submit a project that doesn't meet expectations, I'll return it to you and ask for corrections. You also need to make sure that you followed any constraints and that your write-up meets expectations. Quizzes will be a traditional pile of points, meaning that the quiz questions will receive a numerical score with a potential for partial credit. The syllabus contains a list of learning objectives. Over the course of the semester, you will have 1 quiz question over most of these objectives. Those objectives not covered by the quizzes are covered by homeworks or projects. These quizzes will be online. At the moment, I expect most quizzes will use PrairieLearn and the Respondus Lockdown browser, although it's possible this will change as I see how it works in practice. You'll have at least 2 opportunities to answer a quiz question for each learning objective. Only the best attempt will count toward your final quiz grade. In other words, you get a second chance at all the quiz questions. So actually, this puts us in the middle between traditional grading and mastery grading. Exams will be in person. Taking the exams in person is not optional because this is the one opportunity we have to clearly verify what you can and can't do without outside help. As with the quizzes, there'll be 1 exam question per learning objective. Also, each exam question will correspond to a quiz question. So first, there shouldn't be any surprises on the exams, except for maybe the final exam. And because of this correlation, an exam question score can replace a lower quiz question score. This makes exams kind of like a third chance for quizzes. There is one big thing about grading you need to make sure you understand. Your final course grade is not an average. Look back at the syllabus. There are criteria for each letter grade. For example, to get a B, your quiz average after second and third chances must be 80% or better. Your exam average must be 80% or better. All 4 projects must be working, And 3 of the 4 projects must have a write-up that meets expectations. And a large percentage of the homework assignments must be submitted thoughtfully, complete, and on time. There's one last row here, timeliness. This primarily applies to the projects. If your project doesn't meet expectations by the due date, you can still keep working toward to meet expectations. But you can't just put off all of those fixes until the end of the semester. So, to encourage you to remain engaged with the projects, I do keep track of how long it takes you to complete them, how long it takes you to get them to a meet expectations level. I don't want this to be a stressful, hard deadline, but having no penalty at all for lateness has caused problems in the past. The official textbook for this course is the 2nd edition of Digital Design and Computer Architecture. That's the book with the green cover. This is one of the few textbooks that's actually worth owning. I know there's a lot of garbage textbooks out there in computer science, books that you buy and never open and so on. But this book follows what we cover in the course very closely and has some very good explanations about what we're doing. So it's definitely worth your money to buy. But I suggest you buy the 1st edition of the textbook and not the 2nd. That would be the one with the blue cover. The content is nearly identical. I'm only aware of one thing in the whole textbook that's different between the two. There's probably more, but I really only know about one. And it's much cheaper. You can find them for like 15 or 20 bucks. And this textbook is definitely worth that 15 or 20 bucks. So do go ahead and take a couple extra days to order a cheap copy of the 1st edition online. I'm not going to make you need the textbook in the first week or two, so you can do that. No need to pay the big bucks for the green version at the bookstore. Now I'm going to walk through the tools and policies I use in most of my courses. So if you go back to my homepage or a course homepage, at the bottom of the navigation bar, you'll see a link to my schedule. The 3 most important things this schedule shows are when I'm in class, when I'm in a scheduled meeting, and when I have office hours scheduled. So there are 2 important things to notice about office hours. First, I occasionally teach courses downtown. These are usually grad courses. So when you're looking at the office hours schedule, do take note of where the office hours are. For example, here, my 3 p.m. office hours are downtown. Second, and more importantly, office hours are not the only times that I'm available. They're simply the times when I commit to being in my office so that you can plan ahead. Another way to look at this is that office hours are the times that you can come to my office and be confident you won't be wasting a trip. In general, if I have a class or a meeting or some other reason to come to campus, then I tend to stay for the rest of the day. So if you want to meet and it's not office hours, by all means, just send me an email and ask if I'm available. Or if you're nearby, just walk by my office and check. Don't wait for the magic yellow box on the schedule. When I'm in my office, I use what I call the door metric, which means the farther my door is open, the more interruptible I am. If the door is wide open, then stop in for any reason at all, even just to chat for a bit. If my door is just barely open, then it's best to only stop by if you have a somewhat urgent matter, like you're stuck on an assignment and you're not going to be able to make any progress until we get a chance to talk. I very rarely work with my door completely closed. So if you do see my office door closed, I'm either not there or I'm in an online meeting. I use Piazza as our course discussion board. This is where I'll post any course announcements like corrections to assignments or a schedule change. Also, you can post to Piazza. For example, if you want clarification about an assignment, please post that question to Piazza instead of emailing me. Sending your questions through Piazza has 2 main benefits. First, you're very rarely the only one with your question. By posting to Piazza, I only need to answer that question once instead of having to repeat that answer for every student who sends an email. Plus, there are some students in every class who hesitate to ask questions, even privately over email. So you're helping those students by asking your question in a place where they can see the answer. The other benefit of using Piazza is that you can answer each other's questions. So suppose you're working late at night and have a question. If you email me, you're not going to get an answer till morning. But if you post to Piazza, there's a good chance another student will also be up late and can reply right away. Of course, if your question is of a personal nature, like about your grade or something, you should email me directly. All right, let's take a quick look at Piazza. Every course webpage should have a discussion board section with a link to Piazza. When you follow this link for the first time, you should come to a page that will sign you up for that particular course. So I'm going to choose to join as a student. Notice that it is already set up to sign me up with CS 500, which is the course we were looking at. And I'll click Join Classes down here. Now, if this is your first time joining Piazza ever, you will have to sign up, and you'll need to sign up with your GVSU email address. And then you'll get a verification code. Okay, and then, of course, you'll have to put in name and choose a password and all of that. I haven't checked out this network of students and employers. It's totally up to you if you want to join it or not join it. I can't recommend it one way or the other. Okay, and then once you've signed up, you'll get a little bit of a tour, but notice it's put you right into the page for your course, and you can see what this looks like. The posts here are along the left. So for example, you can see the post I made yesterday with the startup tasks for the course, and there's room for a follow-up discussion down here. So if you have follow-up questions for me, or if you just want to talk amongst your classmates, there's a space for that. If you have a question, you can come up to New Post. When you make a post, it defaults to a question, something that expects an answer, but you do also have the option of just setting up a note if you want to put information out there. One nice thing to put out for your classmates is if you find an online resource or a video that's really helpful, this is a good way to share that with your class, is with a note in Piazza. Okay, so I'll pretend as a student here that I forgot what the homework 1 deadline is. When is homework 1 due? And you also have to tag every post. So these folders up here are just tags. Piazza makes you do that, but it's not really a big deal. In our class of 25, 30 students, there's really not enough traffic for the folders to be highly important. This feature is more important in the large classes that might have 100, 200, 300 students in them. But like I said, you have to put one in anyway, just you don't have to worry too much about getting it exactly right. You can post anonymously to your classmates or everybody. That is an option, not one that's used a lot, but if that helps you, by all means, go ahead and we'll post a question. And so what you see here is now that the question's posted, you have, as a student, an opportunity to answer that question. Like if the question's posted in the middle of the night while I'm sleeping, you help out your classmates. Now, if the instructor answers, you'll see it pops up here. The thing to notice is that instructor answers are separated from student answers. Okay, that should be everything you need to know to get started with Piazza. Piazza does have other features you may find helpful. If you find one you really like, let me know and maybe I'll start using it. Okay, so let's go back to the course page and talk about the next tool, which is PrairieLearn. There should be a section on the main course webpage with a link to a particular course instance. Now here at Grand Valley, to log into PrairieLearn, you need to sign in with Google. You need to use the Google account associated with your Grand Valley issued email, with your mail@gvsu.edu address. And then when you do that, you'll actually be logging in through our single sign-on. So when you log into PrairieLearn for the first time, there might be an additional screen where you have to approve the use of PrairieLearn with your Google account. But once you've signed in, you should land on a page with a list of assessments. And you'll see for this particular course, I'm using PrairieLearn in a variety of contexts, including homeworks and quizzes. So at its core, PrairieLearn is an online assessment platform, which means it provides the tools to give quizzes and tests online, much like Blackboard does. But let me show you a couple of things here, and you can see why PrairieLearn is much better than Blackboard. So here's an example for a quiz. The first thing that PrairieLearn can do that Blackboard can't is that it can randomly generate a unique question for each student. That doesn't mean it's just drawing a question randomly from a pool of existing questions. PrairieLearn is actually using Python code to insert random values into the question. In this case, the constants in the code are chosen randomly. This potentially unlimited pool of questions gives me a lot more flexibility in the way I assess students. which usually means that you have more opportunities to earn a higher grade. The other thing that's really nice is I can set up quizzes to give you multiple chances. So for example, I'll submit some answers and you'll notice I only had 2 of the answers right. However, the mistakes here are simple arithmetic errors, even though this is a programming problem. So rather than having to deduct points for a wrong answer, I like that I can configure PrairieLearn to give you immediate feedback and allow a second attempt. In my opinion, this approach more accurately conveys your abilities. And I'll mention quickly the other reason I use PrairieLearn over Blackboard is that it's much easier to prepare questions in PrairieLearn. So I'll give more details about PrairieLearn to each class individually because I use PrairieLearn in very different ways in all of the different courses. The last thing I want to mention is that when I teach, I make it a point to be as flexible as is reasonable. Every student is unique and has different preferences for how he wants to be taught. Those differences are even more noticeable when you put a bunch of students together in a class. So what works best one semester is not necessarily what's going to work best a different semester with a different combination of students. And of course, I can't make adjustments until I meet the students and see how things work. I mention this because I want to be perfectly clear that it's okay to be frustrated at times during the course. And it's okay to not like certain aspects of the course. And perhaps more importantly, it's okay to let me know what you don't like about the course and suggest an alternative. Sometimes I'll be able to make the adjustment and sometimes I won't because I need to balance the needs of all the different students in the course along with the requirement that I accurately evaluate what you've learned in the course. But I can't fix a problem if I don't know about it, so don't ever hesitate to give me immediate feedback and make suggestions. Specifically, don't wait for the anonymous evaluations at the end of the semester, because first, that doesn't help you. I mean, it's always good to help the students who are coming next, but you also want to advocate for yourself. Second, it's harder to use anonymous feedback because I don't have context and I can't ask follow-up questions. Now, of course, there is a time and place for anonymous feedback, but that's rarely the case in my classroom. I'm not going to get offended if we have a difference of opinion. Trust me, I do a much better job teaching when I know what you like and what you don't like, even if I can't make the course optimal for you. I will listen to you and I will do the best I can. So that should help you get off to a good start in this course. If you have any thoughts or concerns or questions, please either stop by my office or set up a meeting and let's talk.